Righty-ho, it's time for the interview in which we will be asking our lovely guest, Colleen Anderson, who is both a poet and a fiction writer, some fascinating questions. So first question, Colleen, what's the first story you wrote which meant something to you?
You guys like to ask the hard questions, don't you?
We
The first story I wrote that meant something to me. Wow. I've written a lot of stories. I'd have to say, so back in the day, I actually have a couple unpublished novel manuscripts. I wrote a story called Phoenix Sunset, which is kind of cyberpunk, fae-punk. And it was a character study from my novel of a couple of the characters. I have to say that story got published several times. So I guess that was the one that launched me in my fiction. No, sorry, it wasn't Phoenix. Well, Phoenix Sunset and Lover's Triangle, they were both from the same novel and character studies. It was Lover's Triangle that got published several times. So there you go. I don't even know.
Yeah, when you say character studies, do you mean that they were sections of a novel that were almost like short stories contained to study a character?
Yeah, I took characters from the novel, and to better understand my characters, I wrote a short story with them in the same world as the novel, and then just kind of like tried to develop a bit more of who the characters were.
So, aside from those characters, how do you define fae-punk?
So my very unpublished novel, I'm going to try and self-publish it this year because it was written a long time ago, it's where the borders of magic and reality have started to shift, and the world is going through reality rifts. So there are minotaurs and elves and dwarves and pixies and tritons and humans. And there are humans and the fae beings who have chosen to get themselves enhanced with technology, and those that are just human or just fae. And so there are factions, there's fighting, because there's those that believe it should be back the way it was, and there's those that want the new world order. And as they deal with this kind of crumbling world around them. So there's a black hole, there's a gypsy Roma with powers, and then there's a cybernetic elf. So it's it's kind of a complex world with a lot going on in it, but I think that's often
just normal stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that one is not out yet, but we can now keep our fingers crossed for in the future. But if people were going to start reading you today, where would you recommend that they start?
Well, I have had a lot of stories in magazines and anthologies. And in fact, Shadow Plays, which came out from PS Publishing last year, Tom Johnson, a Brit, and I co-wrote a story. And so that's one of the most recent ones. I'm also in Flame Tree Publishing, which has been going great guns and putting out lots and lots of great giant hardcover volumes. I'm in their Moon Falling anthology, which also came out last year. Those are a couple of the ones. I literally have to look at my list because I can't keep everything in my head. There's a couple like there's a Coo of Owls, which is a online magazine, and I believe the stories are free to read. They tend to do shorter ones, more flash or short fiction. And I have a story out from them last year and one coming out this year, and another anthology called Bestiary of Blood, which came out last year. I have both a story and a poem. The story is called The Fable of the Tardigrade, and my poem is called Battle of the Sexless, which is about slug sex.
Solid.
I think
So
quite the
So-
opposite, actually, slug sex, isn't it? It's not solid at all.
are they not rigid
it's not
enough for a
very
moment?
solid.
There's no tumescence. There's no rigidity. That sounds awful.
Well, they actually create love darts and stab each other to see who will carry the egg since they're hermaphroditic. So there is some rigidity.
So
So it's the same as you and I, Ben.
whoever loses the duel has to bear the child.
That's right.
Not being
That's right.
single to Ben.
They're very fascinating. I got after a friend mentioned slugs have love darts, I got stuck in YouTube videos of slug mating, and it's quite fascinating and strange. I just recommend looking it up, and you'll see. Look up love darts.
I'm going to need your whole search history just as a printout.
Yes, I'm sure writers could be police all over the world would probably be looking at writers askance because our search histories do go into very strange and bizarre areas.
How long body decompose?
Yeah. Where's the
Exactly.
corpse?
Yes. How to cut up a body.
Right. So I want to pose you a hypothetical for a moment. Let's say that there are two writers, and they're very nice. They're being held hostage by a powerful mage, a capricious bibliomancer. This mage is hell bent on assembling the best books he can, the best novels he can, for his magical library of stories. What novel would you recommend to that mage to help out these two writers that are being held hostage? Hypothetically.
I hate this question always. I'm just going to say that a seminal novel in my worldview, believe it or not, was Robert Heinlein's Stranger in a Strange Land. At the time when it was written, and his concept, before he kind of got into writing a whole lot of novels about a curmudgeonly old man who was always loved by younger women, Stranger in Strange Land was very strange and different, and philosophically kind of did change my worldview when I was 16. So I would put that one in there. It's so hard. There are so many books, and I forget the titles half the time.
Yeah.
What other ones would I put in there? But Courtship Right by Donald Kingsbury, which long time ago won I think it was the World Fantasy Award, was also just a fascinating look at a different culture on a different world that involved the perfect marriage being 7 people and ritual cannibalism done in a very honoring kind of way, which is a strange thing to say. But it was a very fascinating culture and study of a culture that worked on different principles. So there's a couple old ones. I find it's very hard to remember the new ones. I've just finished reading tons of things for voting in the Stoker Awards. So it's like it's all just a big swirling stew right now for me.
I feel like the bibliomancer would like you to shoot from the hip, so that works well. And also, do you think Heinlein got into writing those later stories because he was going to conventions and that was happening to him?
I don't know if he went to conventions. He might have, but I think he was a curmudgeonly old man who was actually playing out his fantasies. I mean, he actually, in the beginning, wrote a lot of really good female characters, but I think after a while he kind of got stuck in a fantasy rut of what he would prefer. He wrote one that was, gosh, I want to say it was called Friday. That was where a man, like, in the future, the man is transplanted into a woman's body, like, you transfer your consciousness or something. But then they did, I mean, as a kid, I was reading a lot of his books, but I didn't read all of them in the end because I found they did get a little formulaic. But he did have some really great concepts. And, you had Isaac Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke and Robert Heinlein, who were kind of like the 3 science fiction writers of the era, like the early ones. And, I grew up reading most of them. I think I read less Clarke, but I did, read all 3 of them. And they definitely, those authors got me into just reading more. I had an older brother who, when he moved out, left behind his science fiction books. So I was definitely reading what he'd left behind.
Oh, that's nice.
There's something magical about the inherited library, isn't there?
Mm.
Yeah.
That's how I experienced Asterix and Obelisk and the all the Tintin books. So I had older
Oh,
cousins.
yeah.
They would get left behind. Are there any? Obviously, you got that science fiction collection from your brother, but is there anything anyone's specifically given you, sort of left for you or given you, that has had a big impact on you?
Angela Carter's writing, I just love her way of writing. Like, she wrote fiction and fantasy, and her way of, like, if I could write half as well as she, I don't know, I don't know what I'd be. I'd be a demigod, I guess. But she just had a really amazing way with words. And there was some time ago, there was the movie In the Company of Wolves. And when you look at it now, like, the special effects very much do not hold up. But I watched it probably 5 or 6 times because I love stories that have symbolism in them, or movies. And and her stories were taking, it started with the Little Red Riding Hood story, where of course there's been a lot of analysis and discussion on that. It is a coming of age story. It's symbolism for, a girl as she moves into puberty, and knowledge of being a woman. And Angela Carter, took that even farther, and she wrote, the stories of Bluebeard, and just kind of, I wouldn't say she was one of the first, but maybe one of the best known, who started to modernize fairy tales and give them more depth, and just also like the beauty of the language she used. It's like, I really admired what she did.
Was it The Bloody Chamber? Was her Bluebeard?
Yes.
Yes. No,
Yeah,
I
The
read
Bloody
that a long
Chamber.
time ago. It's very good.
Yeah.
It's very good.
So, when you are writing your great big collections of poetry and your endless stories, what is your editing process?
Well, my editing process sometimes, like, I always try and carry a blank book with me. And while I actually do more writing of poetry, I often will write down, like, if I'm working on a story, I start with writing ideas and questions about the story. I find I often get to a story and I'll get halfway through it and get stuck somewhere around where the conflict is supposed to go and what the resolution is. So there's a lot of mulling. The editing process may involve a lot of naps where I try and dream through the ending. Once I get the story written, I've got several tools I use. There's a word frequency counter, so you can pop in your text and it will tell you if you're using death or darkness, or some words, like how many times you use each words. Of course, those little prepositions, the and of, we use a lot, and you can't get away from that. But it's good to kind of, I run it through and go, oh yeah, I've overused loneliness like 12 times. And so I start to do that. I also look for the passive phrases. I'll do word searches for things like could or could feel, things that actually slow down the action. And I will start to weed those out and reword, and go back, and then I'll read through it again. I also work as a freelance editor, so sometimes having a little bit of space is good. But as most writers know, you can edit yourself to a degree, but you will always miss things because you're filling in your mind with all the things that may not be on the page. If I can, I will get someone else to read it. I'm in a small crit group for poetry, but not every poem goes through there. And then there's 3 of us have started a novel critique group for the novels we're working on, which is super, super helpful. So yeah, there's definitely various read-throughs and editing and trying to remove passive phrases and tighten it up, and sometimes go through and go, do I have enough description? Do I use enough of the senses? And I'm thinking with the piece that I read, relating to wings, that I need to actually go through and make sure I put some of the other senses in, because I'm not sure I did that. So that's always a good reminder as well.
I like that idea about of going back and analysing the lexical field that you've generated yourself just naturally
Yeah.
through telling the story. I think that's a really interesting way to see where the actual themes of the story lie. I like that a lot. And also, I will say, I know not everyone can do it because they don't have the time, but the whole idea of like going for a nap to supercharge your writing, it is completely true. If you get stuck
Yeah.
on a story and you go for like a 40-minute power nap, you will come back having your brain having percolated all of the bits of the story and ready to write. It's a really
Absolutely.
powerful tool. I agree with that one. It sounds fascinating. Do you find the work of editing other people's short stories and novels and that kind of thing to be quite satisfying in a different way to editing your own work?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I actually really like editing. I've always been one of those people that, those pictures, like what's different from picture one to picture two.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a puzzle. And for me, I really enjoy going through and trying to, find what's wrong. So it could be, just punctuation or grammar, but it might also be what's a better word, what's another way of writing this that might give it more punch. And, sometimes like when we're writing, we're also stuck in our heads and we might have a way of saying something and we can't get our brain to kickstart out of that. So having somebody else go, have you thought of this word is really, I find that kind of thing very helpful. And that's why even just like using the word frequency generator, helps me kind of notice where I got into a pattern of using, a word so often because it's the easy word as opposed to kind of thinking of a new way of saying something.
I get you. So you're also using it to identify when you're overusing something. I get it. I get it.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. So you mentioned
Yeah.
that Heinlein was quite formative for you, but was there a particular person in your life that inspired you to start telling your own stories and writing them down?
Well, in a weird way, because I had a very fraught family life, like there was a lot of different types of abuse in my family. I started writing poetry and it was a way to, I mean, one, as a teenager, as I started to think about the world beyond myself. I started to explore it in poetry, but it was also a way to kind of deal with some of the feelings that one, I think a lot of teenagers have, but also because of the not great family life, it was, I don't know if I would call it an escape so much as a delving into. So I don't know if I'd say it was a positive role model, but my older brother was the one who left behind all the books. We were readers in our family, and he was he back in I think the 60s is when Stranger in a Strange Land came out, and he was like 9 years older, and he had people approach him and wanted him to be the head of the church that is in, I think it's Michael Valentine Smith is the name of the character in Stranger in Strange Land. They wanted him to become like the head of the church they were going to create. Now, if anybody who's read that novel, they grok people, but grokking also means consuming them. So I don't think they wanted to take it that far, but of course my brother never did do that. But he was very encouraging about writing, and he was very encouraging about anything. Like if any of us came up with an idea, he never said, "Oh, that's silly. You should think of something more realistic." He would just kind of present questions. Okay, well, you want to do this? This is what you should think about, and kind of like give ideas and resources. So yeah, I'd say my brother was maybe that person. And then uh, when I moved to Vancouver in my 20s, I decided to take all my sad teenage poetry. And there was some group that kind of gave like a free analysis of something. And I remember getting like some critique for free and then started to. Oh, and I worked in a bookstore, science fiction and fantasy bookstore, comic books, role-playing games. And that definitely was where the seed to become a writer was truly planted.
Do you still partake in any of those extremely cool hobbies, such as writing character sheets and throwing dice and making up stories with your friends? Not that Ben and I have a personal interest in that at all.
Well, it was strangely enough, while I worked selling the games, I actually never played the games because a lot of my friends played them like every Saturday. And I just was not able to always devote every single weekend to gaming. So I played like one D&D game when I was a teenager. And then last year, a friend of mine, we did like a mini game online with two other people, so there was just four of us, and we did some exploration. So I didn't actually do much of the RPG, but I did read and collect comic books, and of course, obviously read, science fiction and fantasy novels a lot. So yeah, I mean, I wanted to do more gaming, and I still kind of want to do more gaming. And one of my friends has, the wall of games. So he now does once a month, like a game day. And I don't always get out there, but I do love playing games like that.
Do you have a
Well, you
favorite
heard it here.
comic?
Oh, favorite comic? So I used to love X-Men back in kind of like the Phoenix and Storm height, but I'd say maybe my all-time favorite was Love and Rockets, which was done by the Hernandez brothers, black and white, big kind of magazine size. Though they did later on start to do some comic book size and some color, but they each did their own strips, and they had some were just like there was Maggie and Hopi, two women who had kind of a strange friendship, and there'd be a little bit of science fiction that would be thrown in once in a while, or strange creatures that lurked. And they did some mini comics that got really, really strange sexual horror stuff. But I love their drawings, and I just love the kind of bizarre, surreal way that they did things. And I don't know if they're still doing it. Yeah.
I don't think I've encountered that before. Is that where you're? We mentioned in the intro of the previous episode that you also write. You have written erotica in the past. Was that like a segue for you? Were you inspired by them and their strange, sexy stories to write erotica?
No, I guess I was just writing that on my own, but at one point I stopped writing erotica because it was paying less than science fiction. So it was all about ways to publish things. But interestingly enough, I stumbled across a market recently, and I had some stories just sitting on my drive. So I sent them a flash piece, and they actually pay decent, like it's $100 US for 869 words or less. That's the number they had.
869, nice.
Yeah. But so I've just sold that story to them, and we'll see. I think that it's a new online magazine that's going to be coming out called Bothered Stories. So I do write under a pseudonym for my erotica, partly because at one point I was mentoring a young girl in writing who, was in school, and I didn't want there to be any problem if people started looking me up and, parents worrying about what their children were getting.
It's odd that, isn't it? Because it is just a skill. It's just
Yeah.
it's a creative skill. There isn't anything innately seedy about it. I wouldn't say.
No, and it's like even in fiction, science fiction, fantasy, there might be, sex scenes, love scenes, and sometimes they're not needed. They're gratuitous. Like sometimes you're watching a movie going like, oh, do we have to go through this love scene? But it's also a good skill because people can do it very badly, and it then becomes more hilarious than sensual.
God, yeah, I love really badly written sex scenes. I think they're a gift to the writing world.
There was one years ago. So there's a newspaper in the UK called The Guardian, and they ran
Yes.
like an award for the worst sex scene written that year. And it always makes me laugh. This is now about 10 years old, but it still makes me laugh. I'll see if I can find it quickly. But essentially, are you aware of Morrissey? Yeah, you're aware of Morrissey, the singer of the Smiths, the band. So he wrote I think it was a novel or something.
Yeah,
I'll
novella.
see if I can. It was a novella, was it? Okay, right. Okay, here it is. Morrissey wins Bad Sex Award for love scenes in debut novel List of the Lost. I'll see if there's a bit in it because it is really funny. So I assume I can read this out. I'm sure it's not a problem.
It's in the paper. You can read it out.
Yeah. It's not liable if it's already been printed somewhere else.
Exactly. I did used to copy it for an erotic publisher in New York, and some of their stuff was a little too intensely fetishistic in very disturbing ways. But then I was in the middle of editing one book for them, and they messaged me and said, quit where you are, send us the bill. We're getting into movies. And I don't know if whatever happened to them after that. I had a list of, there'll be a style sheet publishing houses have, and they had things like words that you would use for various body parts, such as breasts or boobs or bubbies, and I was like, bubbies. So I was at a convention once, and I did ask the unfortunately deceased Graham Joyce, who wasn't at that point deceased, if Brits used bubbies when they were talking about breasts.
We do not. I can assure you.
Yeah.
So I have found the thing that I was looking for, which is from the List of the Lost by Morrissey. I will just read it out quickly because it's fucking hilarious. The passage reads, and I believe he won the Bad Sex Award in 2015 for this. The passage reads, "At this, Eliza and Ezra rolled together into the one giggling snowball of full-figured copulation, screaming and shouting as they playfully bit and pulled at each other in a dangerous and clamorous roller coaster coil of sexually violent rotation, with Eliza's breasts barrel rolling across Ezra's howling mouth, and the pained frenzy of his bulbous salutation extenuating his excitement as it whacked and smacked its way into every muscle of Eliza's body except for the otherwise central zone." There is no full stop in that, which is why I read that like that. That is
Bulbous
one
salutation.
sentence. Bulbous salutation.
Is...
It's at least 10 sentences, is what it should be.
Oh my God. And it's also just, wow. That is, I was really laughing my head off there. That's hysterical.
How do one's breasts barrel roll?
I believe
for a friend.
I don't know.
I believe you have to be pulling at least 3 Gs for it to work.
Yeah, that's yeah.
How do we recover from this? I know I've got the perfect question to follow that excerpt, Ben. Thanks ever so much. What place does religion have in fantasy storytelling for you, Colleen?
Yeah, religion, that's very interesting. I'm working on a alternate history vampire novel right now. And in fact, I realized kind of inadvertently that my 3 viewpoint characters, religion is very much part of how they're moving through their world. I'm hoping to finish this novel this year, and I'm hoping I can then get it published. But so in that case, it's very important. Some of my stories, not so much. I'm trying to think if I've written any other stories where religion. Well, I wrote a story that was published years ago called An Ember Amongst the Fallen, and it's actually the jumping off point for the novel I'm writing. Though The Ember Amongst the Fallen is a story taking place in the modern world, and it has the Book of the Fallen is the book that the vampires follow. So instead of the Bible, they have the Book of the Fallen. So it's a morality tale, and it all hinges on the great taboo. And so in that case, the religion was very important. But I'd say, well, many of my tales have like a moral conundrum for the character. Not a lot of them are actually have much about religion, but this current novel I'm working on really does. It's all about faith, belief, and how it directs the characters.
Does that come from your own like personal religious convictions? Do you think? Did that inform the way you approach telling that story, or like what about that fascinated you enough to write the novel?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's because in that sense there are, I like the moral dilemma is something that I have looked at a lot with stories, and so with this, there are different beliefs, and then there will be the clashing of beliefs. It takes place sort of in the 15th century, but like I said, in a very alternate history world. So, and I realized as I started to write it that, well, the Celts and the Iceni may still be following their pagan tribal gods like Mana Matlir and Andraste and Breed and, different gods like that. Not the whole world wouldn't be homogenous in its belief, because the whole world certainly is not today. So then I have I had those that follow the Book of the Fallen, so it would be kind of like the Christian version in vampires. And then I have a Mongol. So then again, that's a little more of an animist style. So I'm having to do some research on, different beliefs and gods, and and then adapt it to how vampires would see it. So so that, I guess it does come on my belief. I'm a pagan, I'm a Wiccan. And so I guess actually when I think about it, some of my stories and my poetry, especially in my poetry, I have written like Greek revisioning myths. I have written a lot of stories where I do kind of blend in the earth belief, the earth centered religion, in some way into a poem. Not every poem. And I think it's partly because when you're pagan, you're looking at balance, right? You're part of the world, you're part of the seasons, you respect the world and the seasons. And of course, as our world is becoming more out of balance with pollution and climate change, this becomes something that I'm also writing about a lot, climate change, which may or may not involve a religion. I have a mosaic novella that I'm shopping around right now where every story is named after a Greek god and references a Greek god within it, but it's apocalyptic climate fiction. And so it's dealing with people in a world that's falling apart, and each story deals with grief in some form as well.
That sounds fun. That really, really good.
Yeah.
Absolutely fascinating. I don't know if it's impolite to ask, but what led you to Wiccanism? Because I know a few Wiccans in this country, but they're quite rare, I would say.
Really? Go around
Yeah.
Stonehenge during one of the solstices. You'll find them there. It was kind of, my mother never, when we were children, we did go to Sunday school a bit, but it was mostly for my mother to get us out of her hair so she could have a break. But we never did church regularly, so I never had that very strong religious upbringing. My mother kind of didn't believe in forcing it on us, and she was into like reading books on Edgar Cayce and like more of the mind stuff and like spiritualists. Like I even went with my mother when I was a teenager to the spiritualist church where they did a little bit of hymns, which I felt awkward about, but then they it was like spoon bending or or palm reading, and it was all kind of like that ESP stuff. So I didn't have a really strong upbringing in Christianity. And then in my 20s, when I was here, one of my friends said to me once, they went, are you a witch? And I thought about it and I went, oh, maybe I am. Because I just was, I don't know, I was always kind of just exploring otherwise. And then I started to actually attend pagan events, solstices and equinoxes and various events like that. So I guess I kind of just fell into it naturally.
I think there's something quite special about that. I know, at least in my personal life, and I think Nico to a certain extent would agree. We have in our social circles been probably more consistent in celebrating things like the equinoxes and like Mabon and the various solstices through the year than, for example, the more Christian holidays like Easter and other ones like that. And there is something really nice about having a little shindig, a little social bash around the changing of the seasons that can be seen so obviously. Like there's a reason that they're tied to particular times of year, whereas everything else feels like kind of pointlessly overlaid as a method of control, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, like who doesn't want to celebrate the longest day of the year? And in almost every culture, the shortest day of the year, there's some festival of lights because it's dark and people are depressed and they're going like, please, sun, come back. So, it's very natural for humans to do that. I mean, humans, before we had clocks, humanity ran by the seasons. Everything ran by the seasons. So, and I can perform official marriages, and I'm registered as a Wiccan minister.
Oh, really? Wow.
So, and I actually performed the marriage for friends of mine who are atheists, But when we did that, I said, well, everyone can relate to the elements: air, fire, earth, water. And so we did, within that ceremony, while it was not religious, we did have them kind of do a little thing where, for water, they blew soap bubbles, and they held a candle and lit a candle together, and they drank a glass of wine together. And, it was just
That's
like
cute.
doing something. Yeah. And so they loved that. And I went, this is something that everyone, whether they're religious or not, can relate to. We can relate to the elements. And so it was a way of just kind of bringing that in and giving like a little blessing from the elements.
That's really cool.
It's lovely.
Yeah.
So when you are reading, so we've sort of talked about writing and editing. When you are reading fiction, are there any particular themes that you are drawn to, that consistently drawn to, that you're like, oh, this is my thing?
I no, I mean, I I sometimes do so much reading now for like awards and stuff that I don't have time to read just something I pick up. Like, I've got a couple books here that I ordered like a year ago, and I haven't even cracked them, which is a sad, sad thing. I mean, I became a horror writer, not because I wanted to write horror, but because when I was sending out my stories, I had editors rejecting them, saying we don't do horror. So it seemed that naturally I went to the dark side. So I do read a lot of darker fiction, but I guess, like I said, like with Angela Carter, if stories have, if there's like a deep symbolism somehow, and I can't for the life of me name anything at the moment, but I do like that. I mean, when Bird Box came out by Josh Mallerman, that book has really no symbolism that I can see it. It's a very tense story of a very horrible, unseeable thing that drives people crazy, and they kill themselves and or kill each other. But the tension in that, like, it had such great tension. I've never had a book keep me on the edge of my seat like that book
Yeah.
did. And so, I'll read a lot of different types of stories, so I don't know if I can actually say there's one type.
It sounds like it's more the sensation you're chasing than the theme. Has it got to get you by the guts like that for a book to, like, not
Yeah,
necessarily the fear, but it has to really grip you, it sounds like.
yeah, and like, like Angela Carter, that was the description, like the beauty, the painting that she creates with her words. It's like, it could be descriptive landscapes, it could be mood and setting, really great characters. Like, it's just really, it's like, if it's rich. And I think of it sometimes that there are great stories, and I write good stories, but like, if I can make my story sing, that's going to be a more successful story. And I think we even know as writers that sometimes you write something, oh yeah, that's good, and then you write something, go, this is amazing. So it's and it's just the way the language comes together. And yeah, I don't know, I just like unique, beautiful. Beautiful can be visceral, like your wing story with the Munin, popping the eyeball, that's very visceral, and yet it's beautiful in its own way.
Thank you.
It's the way you've described lots of the books. You're taking in loads of books at the moment. You're doing it for Stokerfest, and then for other stuff you've read recently. You said it's come to kind of miasmic. Like it becomes one. Do you think there's a difference in the way that you appreciate a book that is something that will stick forever? Can you love in the same way a book that flares really bright for a short time and then does just become something you read?
I think you're going to have to repeat that.
That was a tough question. That was a tough question.
Yeah.
So I think to get round my long swirly whirly way I said it, because I was putting my brain in the correct order as I asked. What is there a different kind of beauty to the stories that burn super hot for a short moment and then you leave behind? Or is it the same kind of love that you would feel for the stories that have to live on your shelf and you can recall at the drop of a hat?
Well, I think there's often a different love for those that have such a beautiful and rich world. And I'm about to try and do a giant purge of books that, I've been keeping because I read them. But I know right now there's a few books that I'm going to want to keep because of how beautiful they are, even if I don't read them again. It's
Yeah.
this thing humans have, possessions. But there's and I'm very bad at remembering titles for things like movies, songs, books. So it's like partly I keep those so I can go back and go, oh, right, that's the title of the book that I really love. But it's like sometimes they're swirling around in the back of my head, like some of the imagery from, there was one that was it was written by the Careys. I remember the last name, but it was basically the husband, the wife, and I think the daughter wrote it. And it's sort of like the 1001 Arabian Nights. It's very rich with several tales, and I just remember the essence of it, even if I can't actually tell you an individual story in it right now, because it was such a rich world, and I can see it. And I'm a very visual person. I'm always like, even if I'm standing there waiting for the bus. I'm looking at everything around me. I'm looking at the trees, seeing if they're starting to bud. I'm looking in windows. I'm looking for patterns. So that's part of who I am, is that I'm always looking for patterns or color, or, six people will be standing around and go, oh, four people are wearing blue today. And they'll go, oh, yeah, we are. So I'm just like, I'm very visual like that.
Okay. So in yourself, do you feel connected to any particular culture, and has that affected your writing?
Well, I'd say Celtic, especially because I'm immersed in it right now for writing my vampire novel. But I think part of coming out of paganism as a kid, I really was into myths, Norse myths, Celtic myths, Greek myths. So I'd say Greek and Celtic, not Greek culture as much, but I really love like history, like looking at old cultures. But yeah, I'd say like the Celts in a way, they were fierce, they were tribal, and like when you look at their gods, like the Greeks were very organized. You had a state god, you had, Athena, Athens, and you were ordered to worship Athena. Like the Greeks were very military about it, but they don't even know how many Celtic gods there were, because different tribes had different gods, and a lot of it wasn't recorded. So we know some of them, and it was just it's kind of like, oh, we need a god for this, let's create one. And I mean, obviously that was done by lots of cultures, but I'd say like yeah, the Celtic culture, it does draw me
Do you have a favorite god?
way back. My favorite god,
A favorite
well,
god?
I wrote a story which wasn't accepted for the Flame Tree Morgan Le Fay, but I wrote it as the Morgan. And I'd say the Morgan or Hecate of, well, actually, she's pre-Greek, but those are kind of a couple of my favorite gods.
And what about them sort of draws you? Because obviously we're talking about things from antiquity, aren't we? These a lot of the knowledge of which
Yes.
has been lost to time. So it's really interesting, I think, that to the idea of asking someone what their favorite god is and then being able to tell you is actually really awesome, because it means that we've retained links to things that should have otherwise been forgotten. So what about those particular gods has transcended the centuries, millennia even?
Well, and I've done a fair amount of research on them, and which isn't always easy. But Hecate and the Morrigan are both triple goddesses. They actually bridge, like the Morrigan splits into different aspects. So she's not just the goddess of the war field; she's the goddess of, in another aspect, it's fertility. And like the Morrigan or the Hecate, she's older than the Greek god. She's not one of the Olympians, and she had things she could do that the other goddesses couldn't do, because of course Greeks also had that hierarchy of men over women, you know, people over slaves, gods over humans. And Aphrodite is an interesting character because as a goddess, she kind of defied the rules that the Greeks set up, and which was that, you know, gods rule over men, men rule over women. But Aphrodite kind of did her own thing. And like the Greek gods, she'd run off and, you know, have affairs, which was usually the purview of the male gods. So, but you know, back to Hecate and the Morrigan, there, it's just that they're kind of like, they travel the pathways, they look at the past and present and future. And you know, Hecate is like, she, one of her symbols was keys, because she actually, along with Hermes, she's the goddess of the crossroads. And Hecate later became known as, like, she became a feared goddess, but that was a later kind of Roman invention. And they tied dogs to her, which weren't necessarily there in the beginning. But she was more like a knowledgeable, looked into the past and the present, and guided souls. And that's why she was at the crossroads. So yeah, I just kind of like that triple aspect. And you know, and how do you see the triple aspect? Is it above, below, and in between? Is it past, present, and future? You know, there's different ways of looking at it.
It's definitely on brand for the Romans to destroy a matriarchal god. That seems like their kind of vibe.
Oh yeah, well, even the Greeks were doing it like that. The Proto-Greek was, there were, you know, like the Gaia and that, those earlier goddess, they, you know, from some of the stuff I've read and what they believe is that some of the female, you know, the goddesses had more power. And then as kind of like Greek culture came along and was very male-oriented, women couldn't do anything unless they had a paterfamilia. That the goddesses started to lose some of their powers, but Hecate never fit in there because she was, I'm trying to remember if she was Minoan or Cretan first. Like, she didn't come from the Greek. She was older than Greek. So, so it's kind of interesting that she and Aphrodite both kind of defied some of the rules that the other goddesses had to follow.
It is interesting how Minoan culture has been sort of folded into Greek culture from our perspective in the sort of Western world. I think the distinction has been largely forgotten, especially in more kind of like pop history. But they were very different, and the Minoans were really quite advanced well before the Greeks were. So, oh, what an interesting answer! Thank you. I feel like I could
Yeah, you know,
talk on about that for some time, but I won't. I'll try to not do that.
it's interesting. You've just reminded me that I always wanted, I said, if I ever went back to do a degree, one of the ones I would do is comparative religion. So I'm actually very fascinated when you ask me what religion plays in my stories. That just reminded me that I have always had a fascination with religions. And of course, Minoan or Cretan going into Greek, going into Roman, going into Christian. This has always happened throughout the world, and in every culture and every belief system, is that, you know, our borders are malleable, conquerors come and go, people travel, and they bring their beliefs with them. So nothing is pure.
Absolutely, and belief is almost always transferred via oratory and sort of storytelling mechanisms, right? So
Exactly.
it's a huge part of any kind of storytelling, or it has been,
Yeah.
as well as being a sort of mechanism of control. What a wonderful chat! We've had a lovely time talking with you. But before we wrap this up, can we just ask you again where people should go to keep up to date with your news and when you'll be bringing, you know, like basically any updates for when you're going to be bringing out more work, or indeed why they can buy your current work?
Well, I can be found on Amazon, not necessarily Amazon.uk, but looking up Colleen Anderson and some of the titles that have come out recently for my books, poetry collection, Weird Worlds by Weird House Publishing, and which also they have a limited edition on their website, which can be looked up. And then there's The Lore of Inscrutable Dreams, which came out last year. And then there was I Dreamed a World, which was the poetry collection that came out 3 years ago. And I should also mention that I have a poetry collection that will come out later this year called I'm just trying to remember. Vellum Leaves and Lettered Skins from Raw Dog Screaming Press. And my Weird Worlds collection is also on the preliminary ballot for the Stoker. We'll see if it makes it to the short list. As well, I have a short fiction collection by called A Body of Work by Black Shuck Books, and another one called Embers Amongst the Fallen, which should all be available on Amazon or possibly through the publishers. Lichen Valley Press is the one for I Dreamed a World, and Eureka Publishing for The Lore of Inscrutable Dreams. I'm also on Facebook, where I do post as things come out, which is colleen.anderson.9699 to separate me from the hundreds of others with the same name.
Colleen,
And one day I'll get my blog going again.
Wonderful.
well, let us know when you do. We'll make sure that everyone listening gets a little nudge from us to go and check it out. Thank you so much for your time, Colleen. It's been brilliant chatting with you and fantastic to hear a piece of your story.
Well, thank you to both of you. This has been a lot of fun. It's been very interesting. And let me know when it's coming out. I'll make sure to promote this.
Wonderful. Fantastic.
I'll take interesting, Ben. It's a decent one for us. Let's run away
Always
before she
wants
can
to be
change her mind.
interesting. Yeah. Thanks for joining us for this episode of The Tiny Bookcase.
Remember to subscribe, otherwise you're going to miss out on the future fun.
Also, tell a friend. If you like this episode, link them to it.
We'd be tremendously grateful. You can follow us on Twitter at BookcaseTiny, Facebook at The Tiny Bookcase, and Instagram at BookcaseTiny for updates. Speaking of supporting the podcast, well, magic can only take one so far. The Tiny Bookcase is supported by the generosity of its patrons. Those kind souls have really kept my belly full the last year. Let's cast a spell for them, shall we? For rich ginger tones on their scalp, let us cast the Orangi Hedondo spell for Scott Byrne. And for general fabulousness, why not the Ooh La La How's Your Mother spell on Matthew McLaren?
How do you come up with that shit, man?